It is almost over. And when it is,
Everything becomes ours.
the house...
She's already ready, Ka. All of it.
The champagne was already open. The glasses were poured. The music was low. The curtains were drawn in that small hotel room just 2 streets away from the hospital. And the two of them were laughing. The kind of laughter that comes when people think no one is watching. When they believe the worst is finally over, and the future is finally theirs. But down the hall of that same hospital, a doctor was pulling off his gloves. Slowly, quietly, and he was walking toward the waiting area with a look on his face that did not match their celebration at all. What he was about to say would not just silence the room, it would change everything. Stay with me. Before we go any further, if you are watching this on Noble's Stories, I want you to drop your name and the city you are watching from in the comments right now. We have people joining us from all over the world, and I want to see exactly where our family is sitting tonight. And if this is your first time here, subscribe. You found the right place. Now let us go back to where this story truly begins. Abuja is a city that was built to look a certain way. Wide roads, glass buildings, roundabouts with flowers in the middle. It is a city of appearances. A city where the question is never just who you are, but how you look while being it. And it was in this city, in a clean apartment in Maitama, with a view of the hills, that Emeka Ose built his life, or at least the version of his life he wanted people to see. Emeka was 39. He worked as a senior contract manager for a construction firm with government ties, which meant he was comfortable in the way that certain Nigerian men become comfortable, not rich enough to be careless, but well off enough to believe the rules were suggestions. He drove a dark gray Prado. He wore fitted shirts and kept his beard low. He was the kind of man who walked into a room and immediately understood who the important people were. His wife's name was Adaeze, and Adaeze was the kind of woman who made you believe in goodness again, just by being in the same room with her. She had grown up in Enugu, moved to Abuja for her master's degree in public health, and had met Emeka at a friend's wedding, 7 years before this story reaches its turning point. She was not loud, she was not the kind of woman who demanded attention, but she had a steadiness to her, a kind of quiet grace that Emeka, in his earlier years, had mistaken for simplicity. He would later understand, too late, that it was actually strength. They had been married for 5 years. For the first 3, things were what most people would call fine. Not perfect. Fine. Emeka worked long hours. Adaeze built a small consultancy from their second bedroom. They had disagreements the way all couples do. About money, about time, about the distance that quietly grows between two people when neither of them names it. Then Adaeze got pregnant, and something in Emeka shifted. Not toward her, away from her. There is a particular kind of man who panics when real life arrives. When the pregnancy is no longer an idea but a belly, a doctor's appointment, a name being discussed over dinner. Emeka was that kind of man, not evil, not monstrous. Just afraid in a way he could not admit, and so he moved the fear sideways, into distraction, into distance, into a woman named Temi, who worked in the same building as one of his clients. Temi was 32. She was bright and sharp and completely aware of what she was doing. She did not stumble into this situation. She walked into it with her eyes open. She had known Emeka was married. She had seen the ring. She had heard him mention Adaeze's name in the first few weeks. And she had made a choice. The kind of choice that feels like freedom in the short term and like a cage in the long run. By the time Adaeze was 6 months pregnant, Emeka and Temi had been seeing each other for almost 4 months. Hotel rooms on Tuesday evenings. Lunch meetings that were not meetings. A second phone tucked in the breast pocket of his work bag. Adaeze noticed. Of course she noticed. But she was carrying a child. She was tired in ways that go beyond physical. And she made the decision that many women make in that position. She held it. She held the suspicion and the hurt and the quiet devastation of loving someone who is slowly choosing someone else. And she focused on the life growing inside her. She told herself she would deal with it after the baby, after her body was her own again, after things settled. She never got the chance. The day Adaize went into labor was a Thursday in November. Abuja in November carries a particular kind of air. Dry, harmattan dust beginning to gather at the edges of things. A haze sitting on the horizon that makes the city look like it is wrapped in something delicate. It was early morning, just past 4, when Adaize woke up and knew. She did not panic. That was the thing about her. Even in that moment, she was composed. She sat on the edge of the bed for a few seconds, breathing slowly, one hand on her stomach, and then she reached over and touched Emeka's shoulder. He stirred, looked at her, and in that half-asleep, half-awake moment, something passed across his face, something that looked almost like the man he used to be. He got up. He got the hospital bag. He helped her to the car. They drove through the quiet Abuja streets in near silence, the city still mostly asleep, streetlights still on, a few okadas moving in the distance. Adaize had her window slightly down. She said later, to the nurses who would remember her words, that the air that morning felt clean. She said she liked how quiet the city was. She said it felt peaceful. They arrived at the hospital, a private facility in Wuse 2 that they had chosen carefully, that they had toured twice, that the doctor had said was fully equipped for any complication. Adaize was checked in. She was calm. She smiled at the nurses. She asked if the delivery room was ready. She asked about the pediatrician on call. Emeka stayed with her through the first 2 hours. But then his phone buzzed. He stepped out to take the call. And the call was from Temi. She had seen a message on a group chat. She knew Adaize had gone into labor. And she called not to check on him, but to confirm what she had been quietly hoping. That today was the day things would change. That the pregnancy, the thing that had stood between her and a full claim on this man, would soon be over. What they said to each other in that call, we cannot know exactly. But what we do know is that Emeka did not go back into that delivery room immediately. He stood outside in the hospital corridor, talking to his mistress, while his wife labored inside. He told himself he would go back in a moment. Moments became 30 minutes. A nurse came out and told him things were progressing. He nodded. He said thank you. He texted Temi. She sent back a response with a small red heart. Then the doctor came out. Not with the news Emeka expected. Not the cry of a newborn or the exhale of relief. The doctor came out with controlled, professional urgency on his face and said there were complications. Adaize had developed a severe hemorrhage. They were doing everything they could. He needed to sign some forms. Now, Emeka signed the forms. He waited. He paced the corridor. He called his mother. He called his brother. He sat down. He stood up. For those 40 minutes he was, perhaps for the first time in months, completely present. Because fear has a way of burning away everything else. But it was not enough to change what was already happening inside that room. Adaize fought. The doctors fought. The nurses moved fast and spoke in low, urgent voices and used every protocol they had. But the bleeding did not stop the way it needed to stop. And at 9:47 in the morning, on a dry Thursday in November in Abuja, Adaize Osei, 34 years old, steady and graceful and quietly strong, was gone. The baby survived. A boy, small but breathing, taken immediately to the neonatal unit, wrapped in warmth, alive in the way that sometimes feels like both miracle and cruelty at the same time. Emeka stood in the corridor and received the news alone. The doctor spoke carefully. Emeka did not cry immediately. He stood very still for a long time, the way a building stands still right before it comes down. Then he sat on the nearest chair and put his face in his hands. He sat there for 11 minutes, alone. Not because no one offered comfort, but because in that moment, grief and guilt had become the same thing, and he could not separate them. Then he picked up his phone, and he called Temi. What Temi did next is the part of this story that is hardest to sit with. She did not tell him to take time. She did not say, "Go be with your family." She did not even wait a full day. By early afternoon, while Adaeze's body was still in that hospital, while the baby was still in the neonatal unit with monitors and wires, while Emeka's mother was on a bus from Onitsha sobbing into her wrapper, Temi booked a room. A small hotel 2 streets from the hospital, the kind of place with clean sheets and no questions. And Emeka went. This is the moment in the story where we have to stop and sit in the discomfort, because it is easy to make Emeka a villain and leave it there. But the truth is more complicated and more painful than that. Emeka was not a man without feeling. He was a man who had spent months building a second life, because the first one scared him, and now the first one had collapsed entirely. And the only person he had trained himself to run to was Temi. Grief and guilt together can make a person do things that look inhuman, but are actually deeply, tragically human. He ran to the familiar. He ran to the escape. He could not sit in that hospital corridor with what he had done, and what he had lost, and what that child in the neonatal unit would grow up never knowing. So he left. They were in that hotel room by 2 in the afternoon. Temi had brought wine. Not champagne exactly. A bottle of red she had in her apartment. And she brought it because she did not know what else to do, and because in her mind, in the private story she had been telling herself for months, this was a beginning. Adaeze was gone. The marriage was over. The obstacle had been removed. She told herself she was not celebrating a death. She was celebrating a future. But the body knows things the mind refuses. And even as she poured the wine and tried to smile, there was something sitting at the base of her chest that felt nothing like celebration. She pushed it down. Emeka barely touched his glass. He sat on the edge of the bed in his shirt from the morning, the same shirt he had worn to the hospital, and he stared at the wall. They were not celebrating, not really. They were 2 people in a room, drowning separately, pretending the water was not rising. Then Emeka's phone rang. It was the hospital. The doctor needed him to come back. There were things to handle. Documents. The baby needed its father present for certain decisions. His family was arriving. And as Emeka stood up to leave, the doctor, having been told by a nurse where Mr. Osei had gone, because hospitals in this city are smaller than they appear, and people talk. The doctor said something quietly when Emeka arrived back at the ward. He said it without drama, without accusation, in the flat, tired voice of a man who had seen too much and had run out of patience for pretense. He said, "Mr. Osei, your wife asked about you twice before she lost consciousness. I thought you should know that. That was all." 7 words that were not an accusation, that were not a judgment, that were simply the truth, placed gently on the floor in front of him, for him to pick up or step over. Emeka could not speak. Dr. Nwachukwu had been a obstetrician for 19 years. He had delivered over 2,000 babies in this city. He had seen joy and loss in the same breath so many times that he had developed a careful, measured way of speaking, as though every word was weighed before it left his mouth. He had watched Emeka leave the delivery corridor that morning to take a phone call. He had seen the time stretch. He had seen the nurse go out to inform the husband and return alone. He had said nothing then, because his job was inside that room, with Adaeze. But he had noticed. And when Adaeze, in a brief window of clarity before the hemorrhage worsened, had grabbed the nurse's wrist and asked quietly, not frantically, quietly, where her husband was, Dr. Nwachukwu had heard it. And it had lodged somewhere inside him that professionalism could not fully reach. He was not the kind of man to make speeches. He was not the kind of doctor who delivered moral lectures to grieving families. But he was also not the kind of man who could watch a husband return from a hotel room smelling of wine while his wife's body was still warm, and say nothing at all. So he said the one true thing. He said it once, and he walked away. What that sentence did to Emeka was not visible immediately. There was no collapse, no confession, no dramatic moment in the hallway. Emeka stood there and nodded slowly, and the doctor left, and the corridor was quiet. But something had cracked. You could see it in the way he stood. Slightly different, like a wall after an earthquake. Still upright, but not the same. His mother arrived an hour later. She walked past him, straight to the neonatal unit, straight to the grandson she had not yet held. She did not speak to Emeka for a long time. When she finally did, she said only, "Your son needs you now. Everything else will answer for itself." And that word, answer, settled in the room like something that had its own weight. Because that is the thing about consequences. They do not always arrive loud. Sometimes they arrive in the quiet aftermath, in the way people look at you, in the absence of the one person who always covered for you, in the face of a child who will one day ask questions you do not have clean answers to. Temi, meanwhile, had gone home. She sat in her apartment that evening and felt the full weight of what the last few hours had been. The wine was still on the counter. Her phone had 3 unanswered messages from her sister. She did not know what to say to anyone. She sat with the silence, and for the first time understood that she had been building something on a foundation that was never hers to build on. She did not call Emeka that night. He did not call her. And in the days that followed, the calls became fewer, then stopped. Not because of a conversation, just because some things end not with a door slamming, but with a door that was never truly open, finally becoming visible for what it was. The baby was named Chizaram. It means, God has answered. It was the name Adaeze had chosen, written in a small notebook she kept in her hospital bag alongside her birth plan, and a note she had written to her child that the nurses found and gave to Emeka's mother, because nobody was sure it should go to Emeka just yet. Emeka took his son home 3 weeks later. His mother stayed for 2 months. His sister came on weekends. The apartment in Maitama, with its view of the hills, became a different kind of place. Quieter, heavier, full of the presence of someone who was no longer there. He did not sell the apartment. He could not explain why. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was grief. Maybe it was the need to stay inside the last place where Adaeze had been fully real to him, where her slippers had been by the door, where her books had been on the shelf, where her smell had still lived in the curtains for weeks after. He started going to work late and leaving early. His colleagues noticed, but said nothing. He lost a contract he would have easily won 6 months earlier, because he simply did not follow up. None of it seemed to matter the way it once had. And every night, when he put Chizaram to sleep, he would sit in that chair beside the crib for a few minutes longer than necessary. Just sitting. Just watching the small chest rise and fall. Just being in the presence of the one person who had come from Adaeze and was still here. There is no clean ending to a story like this. There is no moment where Emeka becomes fully redeemed or fully condemned. Life does not work that way. He is a man who made choices, and those choices had weight, and the weight did not disappear when Adaeze did. If anything, it got heavier. But here is what the doctor's quiet words did, that no confrontation, no argument, no dramatic revelation could have done. They told the truth without theater. They placed the mirror in front of him without forcing him to look. And the truth, once spoken, does not go away. You carry it. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, carrying it is what finally begins to change a person. Adaeze asked about him twice, before she lost consciousness, before she left. She was still thinking about him even then, and he had been 2 streets away. That is the sentence he will live inside for the rest of his life. Not as punishment handed down from outside, but as the kind of truth that becomes part of the architecture of who you are, the kind you wake up with, the kind that sits across from you at breakfast, the kind that looks at you from the face of your son. Some lessons do not come in time to save what they were meant to save. They come after. And you carry them anyway. Not because you deserve peace, but because the child in that crib deserves a father who is at least trying to become someone worth knowing. The city of Abuja moves on. It always does. Wide roads, glass buildings, roundabouts with flowers in the middle. The harmattan comes and goes. The dust settles and rises. And somewhere in Maitama, a man sits beside a crib in the dark, listening to his son breathe, learning, too late and not too late at the same time, what it means to truly be present for someone. And that, my friends, is where we leave this story tonight. If this touched something in you, share it. Someone in your circle needs to hear this. Leave a comment telling me what part hit you the hardest. And as always, drop your name and city. Let Noble Stories family know where you are watching from tonight. If you are not yet subscribed to Noble Stories, now is the time. We tell stories that stay with you, because some truths are best carried home in a story. Until the next one, take care of the people who are still here.